evening. So lovely to be together again. I wonder how you and your inner self are getting along. I think without the usual distractions and busyness that we would be experiencing, at the very least with all the traveling and traffic and many different engagements with a variety of people, we find ourselves more vulnerable to that inner voice. Somebody this week told me a statistic which, if it is true, is quite distressing. There's an organization known as SADC. Some of you probably know about it. It is the South African Depression and Anxiety Support Group. Usually this organization on average receives about 500 phone calls a day. That's people who are feeling anxious, depressed, suicidal. And since we've got deeper into lockdown, that figure apparently has increased to about 1,500 people a day. Now, it wouldn't be surprising if that is true. There's so many things that environmentally seem to predispose us to that. What are we meant to do with that? We can't fix it. It's really not an ailment to be solved in that sort of way. And there are no quick and easy solutions that will take away the discomfort and somehow make us feel better about the fact that that figure doesn't exist, because you and I know it's less about the figure and more about the individuals that it represents, and not only the individuals but their families and their friends, the distress that it's conveying about where our society finds itself. But maybe one of the things that you and I can look at is this little inner voice. I wonder what your self-talk has been about recently. Are there words that are speaking compassion, empathy into how you are living within this new context, this context that has no rule book, no textbook to guide, and seemingly no set date in the calendar where things will shift into the next stage? So often when we're in this place that is so disarming in a negative sense by our perception, the self-talk that we're involved in is very critical, quite harsh, and often also very negative. And so I wonder if one of the things that we can do at the very least is to start befriending ourselves, so that we feel as if we're less dislocated, less likely to be in exile from ourselves or to succumb to this negative self-talk that is so often a spiral, so that we also don't automatically make choices that reject ourselves or go into that phase of self-obliteration because of this existential pain that we sometimes find ourselves in. Christy Nelson, who is the executive director of a network for grateful living, writes this, and I put it to us more as a question: what if you and I and whoever else can practice beholding rather than belittling ourselves, befriending rather than begrudging ourselves? Befriending ourselves may feel a little bit strange. I think in so many ways when we think about friendship, we automatically jump to the process of somebody outside of ourselves, somebody distinct from ourselves. But if we look at the way in which we treat our friends, or the way in which we certainly would expect our friends to treat us, how closely does that relate to how we treat ourselves? If you think about it, what are some of the things that would, in a way, define a friendship as opposed to somebody you've just encountered or an acquaintance? Now, when I'm talking about friendship, I don't mean somebody with whom we're friendly, but somebody that is a friend, who's there for us during thick and thin, who's compassionate, who unconditionally loves us, who knows our weaknesses, our faults, our failures, and yet in the midst of that can step up and point out our accomplishments, our strengths, and is always ready to remind us of the more positive aspects of ourselves. If we can do that, if we can befriend ourselves, we will find something in us unfurling. And if we listen patiently and deeply to that, then a friendly attitude towards ourselves will start to emerge. And then we can start delighting in every aspect of ourselves, our quirks, our vulnerabilities, and our gloriousness. And maybe then we can also cultivate merciful gratitude. Merciful gratitude that we are exactly who we are, imperfectly wondrous and wonderfully imperfect. Remember that story of the parable of the man who sold everything to buy the field, in which there was this pearl. What is noticeable about this pearl is the sense that it is unique. It is irreplaceable. It is something of great worth and beauty. At no stage does it say it is absolutely perfect. If we can but begin to treat ourselves like that, I wonder what the ramifications would be. I wonder what the ripple effect would be. There's a wonderful psychologist who is busy doing some, in some ways, groundbreaking research on positive emotions. Her name is Dr. Barbara Fredrickson. And what she's discovered is that in moments of her terminology, micro connection, that can mean laughing with somebody, it can mean hugging someone, of course a little more difficult now, but maybe if you've got a cat and a dog, you can hug them. Even smiling at a passerby. If we think of the early mornings as people are walking their dogs and their children from 6 until 9 o'clock. And just that micro connection, it actually strengthens something in our physiology. It's something known as the vagus nerve. And the vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve that we have. And as we strengthen that, and especially if we can strengthen it every day, it is measurable that the stress in our bodies is reduced, and a positive quality is incorporated, increased in our body to the point in which our health increases, our well-being. And gosh, couldn't we all do with something like that, that boost to the immune system? So look out for that, and I think also become that for others around, even if it's the person on the other side of the gate or the other side of the road, even if it's the little bird who's fluffing up feathers in the early morning. Just have that moment of micro connectivity. I wonder if we can also just put in place 3 simple things over and above that micro connectivity. The first one is either daily or 3 or 4 times a week, doing a compassion-centered and loving-kindness-centered meditation. Now, there are different ways of doing that, but one of the ways we do that is by breathing in God's compassion and breathing out and letting go of all those things, all those self-talk messages that are negative and harsh and critical. Just keep breathing in that compassion, letting go of those things that debilitate and drag down our well-being, our health. And then in terms of loving kindness, as we engage in that meditation, is to look upon our inner selves, to look upon the essence of me, our meanness, with loving kindness, with soft eyes. You don't have to do this for a long time, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Maybe you're brave enough to even try 15 or 20 minutes. The second one is the practice of receiving and accepting compliments and praise. That could be somebody over the telephone to you, or an email, or even a family member if you're living in family, or even, believe it or not, the compliment of having a cat sitting on your lap and purring. And yes, our go-to response often is to deny the compliment or the praise. But before we do that, what about putting a little 5-step process in place to help us to receive and to practice the receiving of this positive affirmation, these true affirmations? So the first thing is to stop and not to do anything. And this really, all of these 5 steps literally take 2 or 3 seconds. So interiorly or exteriorly, not to say anything, just stop. Then breathe. Breathe and find a space within yourself simply to receive. Notice. Notice if there's any resistance to receiving it. Notice if there's something that's guarding you and stopping you from receiving it. And then reflect. To reflect, is this true? And am I worthy of receiving this? You might find to your surprise the answer is yes, in which case imbibe it, ingest it. If you're not ready, it doesn't matter. It's already beginning to build a pathway, so that maybe next time you will be ready. And then the last step is to respond. And the response is not complicated. It's simply thank you. And then the third encouragement is every day, just before you go to bed, for 10 minutes to write 3 things down in your gratitude journal. I know I've spoken about this before, but it really bears repeating. And I'd like to end this evening of our sharing in our own thinking, and sometimes I wish this was a blog so that we could really engage in a more meaty way, rather than me simply having a one-way conversation. But I'm going to end with that lovely, lovely quote that comes from Winnie the Pooh. And you may even remember it. It's when Christopher Robin is trying to prepare Pooh for one day when he goes away, and when they won't be together. And he says to Pooh Bear, and this of course is A.A. Milne's books of Winnie the Pooh, he says to Pooh Bear, remember, you are braver than you believe, you are stronger than you feel, and you are smarter than you think. Those words are from my heart to yours, because I truly do believe that about you, about me, about all of us and each of us. Good night, and may you have a soft, kind, and loving evening.